Tonight we're talking all about self-care, and I can see a couple of you are on board. Hello, Steffi. So I'm going to launch into it, and those of you who are just coming in will be able to keep up as we go along. And so the first thing, the thing that I really want to cover and want to make sure you really get out of this is that self-care isn't selfish. Okay, I know that you are all wonderful people and you all have amazing things to contribute to society. Hello, Kim. I'm glad you don't mind. It looks like no one minds. All right, I'm going to happily just keep saying guys, which is good. Um, so, self-care isn't selfish because, as I said, you are wonderful people. I know you all have wonderful things to contribute to the world, and I know you already contribute wonderful things to the world and to others and to everyone around you. And the best way you can do that is by being the best version of yourself, by showing up as the best version of yourself. And so the best way to show up as the best version of yourself is to look after yourself, is to make sure that you are nourished inside and out, so that then you've got more, so that your cup is then overflowing onto everyone else around you. I know for me, the last couple of years, for all of us, I think the last couple of years have been big years, and so, we've had COVID, we've had a small child in the family, I've started a new business, there's been all sorts of stuff going on. And so I know that within that time frame, there have been times where I haven't been at my best. There's been times when I've been tired. There's been times when I've been stressed. There's been times when I've been strung out. And that's okay. I think we all go into all of those places and worse at various times in our lives, and that's totally okay. And the challenge for us, I think, is not to stay there, is not to get stuck there, right? And so this is where I think the self-care comes in, is that in those times, and particularly in those times, but perhaps even more importantly at the other times before you get to that stage, is putting time into and prioritizing your self-care so that you can look after yourself. Because I know, and I'm sure, I don't know, Steffi might not agree. Steffi should agree. She might not because she's too nice. But I'm sure she'll recognize that there have been times along that journey, particularly over the last couple of years, where I haven't been at my best. And where I then haven't been at my best for her or for our kids or for the people around me. So, and like I said, I'm okay with that. That's okay. That happens. That's normal. That's natural. However, at the same time, I'm determined not to stay there and not to make that my normal, to make that the exception rather than the rule. All right. So I've included in here a definition of self-care from our favorite world organization at the moment, the World Health Organization. I know you've probably got thoughts on what they're up to at the moment, but anyway, that's a total aside. But they said self-care is the behaviors you do to take care of your own health. And it can include hygiene, nutrition, leisure activities, sports, exercise, seeking professional health services when needed, and much more. Actually, that was a pretty good definition, because I think sometimes when we think of self-care, we think of a somewhat limited definition of self-care. We only think of those sort of, pampering experiences that make up one part of self-care. But I think self-care can and should be a whole lot more than that. So I'm going to talk about lots more than that. As you may have heard me talking about in the lead up to this, I've actually got 22 different points that I want to talk about tonight. So I've got a bit to get through, but that's one of them. And so I've got 21 more to go. But yeah, I think it is important that we understand that there is more to self-care than just pampering. Okay, and I think an important first step always when we're talking about our health, when we're talking about wellness, when we're talking about really any of our life goals, I think, is a little bit of self-analysis. I think it's important to understand where we're at before we can figure out where we want to go. I always think of it in terms of having a map, and it's wonderful to have a great map, a road map to show you where to go. But if you don't know where you are, the map is useless, right? If you don't know your point on the map, if you don't know where you're starting from, then the map tells you absolutely nothing. It doesn't help in any way, shape or form, right? So the first thing you need to do is figure out where you're at. And so in terms of self-care, I think a little bit of self-analysis can be really useful. And that is looking at things like, how well are you sleeping? How well are you eating? How well are you moving? Where are your thoughts at the moment? But then I think other things can be really useful in terms of self-care, is like looking at what's been triggering you lately. What causes you to withdraw? What causes you anger? how much have you been doing those things? How much have you been withdrawing? How much have you been getting angry? How much have you been expressing your emotions? Once again, not that expressing your emotions is bad, but if you're doing it all the time, then it can be an indication that things are a little bit out of balance, and that might need a little bit of a reset, right? What physical symptoms have you been experiencing? Classic things like headaches and stomach pain that might be reflections of stress and anxiety, right? What's your energy like? What's your happiness like? Happiness is always one of those interesting ones. I don't think we can expect to be happy all the time, but we can, expect to be happy a moderate, a proportional amount of the time. And I think that if that's not happening, then we want to assess where we're at and look at how we're looking after ourselves. And I think a big one is contentment. As I was looking through all the sort of self-analysis tools and thinking which ones really resonate for me, contentment is probably the one that really resonates for me. Is that when I'm feeling content, then that's usually when I've got the balance right. And when I say the balance, it's often the balance between my drive to want to grow and to produce and to leave a legacy and to inspire people around me. I often talk about one of my big life purposes is around having an influence on the health and wellness of our planet. And creating a healthy world for my kids to grow up in, right? So, there's the balance between that drive and then between my self-care. And sometimes they overlap. Sometimes the best thing I can do for myself is pursue that passion and pursue that drive, because that really lights me up and inspires me and gets me going. And at the same time, there needs to be a balance there. Those of you who've been to a wellness summit may or may not have noticed or experienced this, but for me, being quite an introverted personality, I can get quite burnt out doing something like that. Well, actually, so probably more so a wellness breakthrough, where it's that intensive over 3 days over the weekend. And so you may or may not have noticed that I would on occasions just take some time to sneak off into my room and just lie down by myself for a little bit and have a little bit of quiet time. And that was me, balancing that life purpose with that self-care, is recognizing that as an introverted personality, I draw energy from peace and solitude. And so I need to find that balance so that I can show up as the best version of myself across the weekend for all of the people who are there wanting to be inspired towards health and wellness and wanting to help me create a healthier world for my family to grow up in. So, I think contentment for me is a really good word that sort of encapsulates that. It might be different for you, but perhaps spending a little bit of time doing that self-analysis and working out what that word is for you. What is the thing you look for that lets you know that you're on track, that lets you know that you've got. And once again, I'm reluctant to use. I've used the word balance a couple of times, and I'm always reluctant to use the word balance because it kind of implies that it should be in balance all the time. And often I like to use the word homeostasis more often than that, because even though it's a slightly more complicated word and one that we don't necessarily define as easily, I think it better expresses what we're trying to achieve. Where homeostasis is the idea that your blood pressure will go up and down, but overall it finds a level of homeostasis, right? Your cholesterol might go up and down, your blood sugars might go up and down, but overall they find a level of homeostasis. And I think that's the same when we're talking about self-care. There'll be times in your life where you're really driven and goal-driven and driven towards growth and change and creation. And there'll be other times when you're really focusing on that self-care, and it will go a bit up and down, but as long as it's not just getting stuck in one or the other, or one at the expense of the other, I think that's really important. That's why I sort of like to use the word homeostasis rather than balance. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if it does. So that's the self-analysis, and I think that's a really great place to start. And then I think the next thing we need to think of is really start to define what we mean when we're talking about self-care. And I think one of the easiest mistakes to make when we think about self-care is to really start thinking about short-term self-care. And if we think about what's going to make me feel good right now, sometimes that can lead to negative long-term consequences, and actually isn't really what I would think of as self-care at all. All right. And so, the easiest way to think about this might be in terms of your diet, right? And it's like, so, you might be feeling a bit flat and you have the opportunity right now just to, smash a chocolate cake to make yourself feel a bit better, right? And that might make you feel a bit better in the short term. And if you're only focused on sort of self-care in the short term, then you might think that's okay. But if you keep doing that day after day after day, then we know that you're not going to feel so good, right? You're not going to be really looking after yourself. You're probably not even going to feel good in the moment as you keep doing that. And so the long-term consequences of that is that it's actually detrimental to yourself. And so I don't think we can really define that as self-care, at least not if we're doing it on a consistent basis. I think we might be able to argue that as a one-off, when you're just having, a really shitty day, or just, sometimes there's a time and a place for it, right? But that, you want that to be the exception rather than the rule, is that short-term solution, I think. Whereas most of the time you want to be goaling towards that more long-term self-care, is doing the things that are going to help you not only feel better now, but feel and function better well into the future as well. And I think that's a better definition of self-care if we can start thinking about it from a longer term perspective. So I'd love to know what you guys think of that. Has anyone had any ahas as they started to think about what they do in terms of self-care and in terms of long-term versus short-term? I know we've all probably got guilty pleasures we do as short-term ones. And as I said, there's a time and a place for those, and I think that's okay. But you don't want it to be all the time, and you don't want it to be the rule rather than the exception, right? So that's healthy. That's long-term versus short-term. I think it's really important for self-care is that we prioritize it. I think self-care is going to be, it's easy for it to become the last thing on your list and the last thing that you add into your schedule because it's important but not urgent. Okay. In most cases, sometimes you get to the stage where self-care becomes urgent because you've just done such a lousy job of your self-care over such a period of time, or life has been just stressing you out to the point where self-care becomes urgent as well. I know I've been at that place at times in my life. I certainly spoke about that in my book Rock Bottom after my divorce, where it became an urgency, it became an essential, I have to do it right now rather than I really should do it, or I really could do it, I really would love to do it, which is always better than should. And so I think it's easy for it to be important but not urgent, and as a result get left to the end of our list. And I think the way to do that better is to be more mindful of it, and is to prioritize it, and that is to really schedule it in, is to find the time when you're going to do the things you do, and put it in your calendar, and make sure that you do it, and so I'll talk later about some definitions of self-care, and how what I think of as self-care might be really different to what you think of as self-care, right? But for me, one of the things that comes into my self-care bucket is playing indoor cricket, because on a Wednesday night, I play indoor cricket with my mates, and we get together, and for an hour and a half, we just play sport, and we have a laugh, and we have some fun, and we're competitive, and we're serious. And when we lose, like we did last night on the last ball of the day, I get a bit grumpy sometimes. But it's great. It's an escape from everything else. It's a time to just have fun, and to enjoy some socialization and some company, and just do something different. Move a bit, which is great. Maybe have a beer after the game, which is okay. And so that comes into my self-care. And so that goes into my schedule, on a Wednesday night. That's pretty heavily locked into my schedule as something I'll do. And I know Steph will acknowledge that it's very, she puts up with that very well. Thank you, Steffi. But I think, I hope that she understands that as a, for my self-care, that's really important in terms of helping me show up for the rest of the week, for her and for the family, and for, the people I want to inspire and help in my world. So I think scheduling it in is really important. And I think in terms of the way you do that, using technology is an underrated way of doing your self-care, because I think we often berate technology for what it does to our lives and how it impacts our lives and negatively impacts our lives. And I think technology is like many things, where it's not the technology that's the problem, it's what you do with it that's the problem. It's kind of like what they say about money. money doesn't make you better or worse. It just makes you better able to do the things you already are. And so I think technology is a little bit the same, and so technology can be used for your self-care. For me, I use alarms all the time, and people laugh at me, but it works great for me because I'm an overthinker. My head is already full of so much stuff that I'm overthinking and analyzing all the time. That to be able to take some of the things that I want to be able to do and I need to be able to do and I want to remind myself to do out of my head and put them somewhere else where I know that they'll come back at the appropriate time, I find really useful. So one of the things I do is I set myself alarms. And if that's something to do with my self-care that I really want to make sure I do, then I have an alarm for that to remind me to do it, right? So every Tuesday morning, as I'm dropping the kids off at school, and the kids laugh at me for this every Tuesday morning, but as I'm dropping the kids off at school, my alarm goes off on my phone as we're driving along to say, don't forget to go for your chiropractic adjustment, because that's what I do. And once again, it's in the schedule. It's Tuesday morning, it's booked in, it's 9:15. I drop the kids off at school, I go straight there. I usually just get there in time. And I have my adjustment, and that's a really important part of my week for me and a really important part of my self-care routine. For any of you, Steffi will know when she looks at my laptop, my screensaver is always a different quote that I find inspiring at the time, right? So I use my screensavers to remind me of my self-care, and as part of my self-care, I also use my passwords as part of my self-care. Now, I got to be honest, talk about technology. I do have a lot of my passwords saved into LastPass now, so that once again, I don't have to remember them. I can move those out of my head. And once again, that is also part of my self-care, is taking things out of my head that don't need to be in my head, trusting technology to look after that side of things for me, so that I can use more of my brain power doing the things that I love and on the people that I love, rather than stressing out and getting frazzled about trying to remember a password, right? So I use my passwords. I use passwords. So in terms of my Facebook password, I think my Facebook no, I can't tell you my Facebook. I was about to tell you my password. Anyway, it is a positive affirmation. Let's just say that. That's hilarious. I can't believe I was about to say that. All right. So next one. So let's get into some of the things we can do for self-care, right? And like I said, I think very often people think of self-care and they think of it in regards of, pampering experiences. And I think self-care needs to be a lot more than that. So I really think we want to start with the basics and things like sleep. And I'm glad that I'm talking about this today and not earlier in the week, because we've had a bit of an interesting week in our family. We've had a bit of gastro go through the whole tribe. We've had a few restless nights as a result, with kids being sick and not sleeping well and all of those sort of things. We haven't done it in a bad way. It's been a really healthy experience for us in that all of us have dealt with it really well. We've recovered well. We haven't needed to do, we've just trusted our body to heal and recover, and it's done it really well. So it's been an okay experience, but it has meant that we've had less sleep. So this morning, even though I had lots of work to do today and I needed to prepare for this webinar, and I had a whole list of things to do on my to-do list, it was absolutely chockers today. I slept in, and I slept in much longer than I usually would. And thankfully to Steffi, she got up, got Timmy ready, got him out the house so that I could keep sleeping in, which was wonderful because I needed it today. And so this morning I prioritized sleep because I know that it's important and I know that it makes a difference to everything else that I do. And so once again, sleep is something that you need to prioritize. We might do another whole webinar on sleep at some stage in the near future, because there's so much I could say about how to make sure you get a great night's sleep. But I think for the moment, I'm just going to say, make sure you're prioritizing it, and make sure you're doing what you need to do to get a good night's sleep and to create the right environment for you to get a good night's sleep. Continuing on with the basics, I think breathing is something that's underrated. We seem to be rushing around so much that we often just don't stop to take a couple of deep breaths. It's one of the things I'll often do in the practice when someone's racing around and they're running in and they're 10 minutes late and they're just stressed out of their mind, and they sit down on the table and I just put one hand on each of their shoulders and I just say, just take 3 deep breaths. And it's amazing as they take those 3 deep breaths, you can just feel their physiology change, right? And so something you might want to do for self-care is just have a little bit of a focus on your breathing. And it might be, I'm just going to take 3 deep breaths. It might be that you're going to breathe focusing on your diaphragm. You might want to do alternate nasal breathing is one that's really popular right now, and apparently has some research behind it in terms of how it de-stresses your nervous system. Box breathing is another one. Once again, you can look up all these different versions of breathing. There are many of them out there. But they're all about just being a bit more mindful, and they're about making sure your body is getting enough oxygen, which is really important. And particularly over the last 2 years, sorry, my cup of tea. Particularly over the last 2 years, I think getting enough oxygen, how ironic that I started choking on that comment, has been really important. I think Louise Hay would say I'm not saying what I really want to say about that topic, and it's probably true because I'm not allowed to. Anyway, I'll just clear that out. So anyway, making sure you're getting enough oxygen, I think, is really important. Summer says, if I need a rest, I'm at home, I shut my windows and doors, go to bed, not sleep, but just curl up and seek some comfort. Yeah, and I think that's good. I think that quiet time to yourself is great. Okay, cool. So I think the next one is exercise. Once again, I think exercise is very much underrated in terms of self-care, because many people have a really shitty relationship with exercise. And they think of exercise as punishment. And they think of exercise as something that they have to do rather than something they'd love to do. I'm glad you can read between the lines, Helen. That's good. I feel like my entire podcast nowadays is all about reading between the lines. I go on there and I say what I'm allowed to say and let everyone figure out what I really want to say. And I actually kind of enjoy it. It's quite fun. Anyway, exercising because you love yourself is really important, So we need to love to exercise. I think a lot of this, once again, will come back to the short-term versus the long-term thinking. But I know, talk about my Wednesday night indoor cricket mates. They're not the fittest, healthiest bunch. They're mostly doctors, which is always ironic. And they puff and pant their way around a Wednesday night indoor cricket game, which doesn't involve heaps of movement. And they do comment that I'm still maintaining my fitness, and they know that with one of their other mates who doesn't play cricket, that they, I'll explain in a sec, Summer. They know that we hit the gym pretty hard and we love it and we challenge ourselves and we get into it, and they just can't get it. They're, why do you do this crazy stuff? Why would you do that? Doesn't it hurt? Why, often I'm quite sore still when I get to Wednesday night indoor cricket, or I've got really bad DOMs from the exercise we did that morning or the day before, and they just don't get it, right? And because what they don't get is that they don't understand that I'm doing it because I love it, and not just because I love the exercise, although I actually do love the exercise. I love challenging myself, but I love the benefits that I get from it, and that is physical, that I'm more energetic, that I'm more capable of doing things and playing the entire rest of my life because of the things that I do in the gym, and also mental, in that I'm more mentally resilient as a result of the challenges that I push through in the gym, right? And so I love doing it, and I do it because I love myself, and I love doing it because I love the benefits that I get from it, not necessarily in the short term. Because if you ask me halfway through the exercise, I can be a really grumpy shit and really be whinging about it and being like, why the hell am I doing this? And, don't interrupt me when I'm trying to just get this done. But I know that as soon as it's done, I feel good about doing it. And for the rest of my week, I feel good about doing it and I enjoy the benefits. Some of the reading between the lines in regards to breathing was probably just in relation to mask wearing and the consequences of that. So I won't say too much more, but I'm sure you can figure that out. And so, exercise because you love yourself. And things like playing sport or just playing, I think, really come into that. And so, you don't have to think of exercise as exercise. You might want to do exercise, whether that's CrossFit or yoga or gym or running or whatever that is that you like to do. But you also might just want to be more playful. And I think in terms of self-care, playfulness is really underrated. And that might be playing a sport, as I do with my mates, playing indoor cricket. It might be comedy and telling jokes. It might just be frivolity, just being silly. I mean, kids are wonderful for this. They're great teachers in this regard of just being silly, just mucking around, just being playful, just having a laugh, just having some fun, not taking yourself so seriously. I think these are wonderful, playful examples of self-care where we can just step aside from some of the stresses of our modern lives and some of the things that worry us on a day-to-day basis, and just allow us to be a bit more childlike, to be a bit more innocent, to be a bit more frivolous, to be more fun-loving. And I think that is really nourishing for our soul. I think that is really nourishing for our nervous system. I mean, there's so much research into the benefits of laughter in terms of your health. And I think that's just one example of play and how we can be more playful and allow that playfulness to come into our lives in a huge variety of ways. And once again, it's going to look very different for everybody. You may not see yourself as a particularly, as particularly being into comedy as one example, but you may, there are other ways in which you are playful and games that you like to play. So, play around with that, check that out. Start to think of, what does playful look like to you? I think getting out into nature, once again, it's such an underrated method of self-care. You don't have to be at the beauty salon to be doing self-care. You can be just what the Japanese call forest bathing, which is spending time outdoors. They actually do a lot of research into this in Japan. And if you research forest bathing, it's amazing what comes up, and it's really, really cool. So forest bathing, they use essential oils a lot as part of that process. And so in order to try and bring some of that forest bathing into their daily lives, they use essential oils. I know Kimmy would be a big fan of that. And so, when Steffi was going through pregnancy and labor, one of the things I did was I purchased some of the essential oils that the Japanese use as part of their forest bathing rituals. In fact, there were two essential oils that I found. I can't remember the names of them right now. Steffi will probably remember and will probably put it in the comments in a second. But there are actually two essential oils that the Japanese use in their hospitals as part of this forest bathing principle, which I just thought was brilliant and fantastic. And so we use those as Steffi was going through her pregnancy and labor. Bringing flowers and, there you go, cypress and pine oils from Japan. There you go. Bringing flowers into your life, whether that's just into your home, whether that's into your work. You don't need to buy them. You can pick them. You can be part of your forest, your nature. You can go out and go for a lovely walk, and you can, bring some of that nature back with you and back into your environment. I think live plants are even better, but picked plants and flowers are good too. Fire, once again, I think is an underrated one. Like, who doesn't feel relaxed when you're sitting back looking at a crackling fire? I know last Saturday night we were invited around to my brother's place. And we sat around and we had a big fire. We cooked on the fire. We had some music playing and we all just chatted and caught up. Had some of his organic wine, Organic Hill. If you're looking for good organic wine, he just got a very good rating for one of his wines, 96 out of 100 from Wine State magazine. He'll love me for mentioning that. Had some organic wine, had a chat, had a laugh, and it was so therapeutic. It was wonderful. So that was really nice. And, you can even just YouTube nature, you can bring a little bit into your life. You can use a little bit of technology, which, as I said, isn't as good as the real thing. But, you might be going to bed at night listening to waterfalls or bird song or, whatever the case may be. You can do it that way as well. It's not my personal favorite. But if that's, for many people, they find those sounds very relaxing and very nourishing. So, food, food can be a great way to look after yourself. And as I said, there'll be times when you will go to comfort foods in times of stress, in times of reward, in times of, And I've spoken about this a number of times before. I think a lot of that comes back to conditioning we got as kids as to what we were taught to do when things were tough or when things were good, and how we would reward ourselves. And I think we can probably do better a lot of the time, particularly as parents, in terms of the links we create in terms of those rewards. And as adults, I think once we've got those links so well established, then sometimes it's appropriate for us to use them, and to reward ourselves or to nourish ourselves in that way. However, I think most of the time it's not. And if we're doing it most of the time, then we're going to lead to, it's not really self-care. It's going to lead to negative long-term consequences. And so I think, when we're thinking of self-care, we need to really start thinking about the healthy, feel-good foods and drinks. What are the things we have that we know are good for us and make us feel good? Because it doesn't have to be either or. Like, it's not like junk food makes us feel good and healthy food. It's not like junk food makes us feel good in the short term and healthy food makes us feel good in the long term, even though that's the way many people think. The reality is that some healthy foods will make you feel great in the short term and the long term. And I think that's the goal we want to aim for. This is certainly what I talk to my kids about a lot. I talk about this a lot in my book, Nourish Without Nagging. If you haven't checked that out, you can get that on my website, drbretthill.com, or in my practice, Healthy Choices Chiropractic. And so, I talk a lot about, things can be good in the short term and the long term. And my kids really understand that, when we make our own homemade chocolates for Easter, it's because we want them to taste great on Easter. We want to have fun finding them and hunting them and eating them. But we also want to feel good the next day, the next week, the next year. We want to be able to be healthy and perform and play footy or dance or sing or, whatever it is that lights us up and makes us passionate, right? So really focusing on healthy choices when it comes to your self-care around food and drinks, I think is really useful. And then you sort of get to, I think, some of the things we'll think of more so in terms of, innately think of when you say self-care, people think of a lot of the me time things, right? I always refer to them as me time, the things that you do for you that make you feel good, that make you feel relaxed, right? And so, the classic ones you hear about are like yoga, music, dancing, reading books, meditation. And I think these are all great, and for many people, these are wonderful. I know for me particularly, books and music are probably the two of those that I would use the most. And then I think, as I said, I think there's others that come into that. That might be, I think writing and drawing, many people would consider to come into that category as well. But, for me, things that might come into that category might be fishing, boat building, exercising in the gym, playing indoor cricket. These are things that I do when I want some me time. And so, spending that little bit of time just doing something that lights me up, something that makes me feel good, something that makes me feel like I'm being productive sometimes, but also just doing something for myself, or doing something for my future self, or for my family. In the case of boat building, it's a real sort of legacy item that makes me feel really good, So I think that the message I guess I'm trying to get across here is don't think that your me time has to be the same as everyone else's me time, and don't think that there's a right or wrong way to do this. I think so long as you're doing something that is making you feel like you're prioritizing yourself and taking care of yourself, and so long as most of the time it's something that is looking after yourself for the long term, not just for the short term, then I think you're going to be in pretty good stead there. Okay. The other sort of, self-care routines I think we can have, these are not necessarily things that we're going to jump to straight away when we feel like we need to pamper ourselves, but they're things that we can just do on a regular basis as far as our kind of, I guess, like self-care maintenance, I want to call it, particularly from a mental side of things, is focusing on things like kindness and gratitude, kindness towards ourselves in particular, I'm talking about in this case, gratitude towards ourselves and towards others, acknowledgement of ourselves for the things we've done and performed and achieved, affirmations, and plans for what we would do in the future. Spending some time planning, I think can be a really useful self-care tool. I can say for us as a family, we've sat down, we had a holiday planned like 2 weeks ago, and the morning, and I feel like we were really due for a holiday. Like, as I said, we've had a big couple of years. And it just got to the stage where we're so due for a holiday. Let's plan something. So we planned this week away. We were going to go away to the Port Lincoln National Park. We're going to be out in nature, in the swags, camping, fishing, kayaking. It was going to be awesome. And the morning of, like several hours before we were due to leave, the kids were at their mums, started feeling a bit sick, got tested, had COVID, got reported, had to isolate, and we couldn't go on our holiday. In fact, Steffi and I thought we could go on a holiday. We headed off. We drove 3.5 hours to Port Wakefield, and then got a text notifying us that we were also notified as close contacts, and so we had to go home too. And so we didn't get our holiday. So as part of our self-care, the point of this story, as part of our self-care at the moment is one of the things we're doing is planning our next holiday. And so we're planning that in the middle of the year, next year, we'd like to go overseas. And so we're making this a really fun thing because I think there's a lot of, self-care. There's a lot of benefit. There's a lot of fun. There's a lot of playfulness in starting to look at where we want to go. So, so Steffi and I sat down and came up with, I think, about 12 different places where we thought we would like to go. And once again, from a perspective of self-care, we're really mindful of, where we're at the moment with, with a small child, with me just having started a new practice, with, Steffi having not been able to invest as much time into her studio as she otherwise would as a result of nourishing a small child and doing a wonderful job of it. Then we didn't want to go nuts in terms of planning a holiday, go to Europe, spend $1 billion and stress ourselves out even more. We recognize that there was value in being slightly more frugal in terms of our holiday as part of our self-care, right? Because we're recognizing that we don't want our holiday to stress us out for the other 51 weeks of the year, right? So I think that's something you can be mindful of in terms of that kindness. We could otherwise be comparing ourselves to the Joneses and saying, well, look, I've got this friend is going to Europe, or this friend's going to America, or this friend's going to Canada, or whatever the case may be, and trying to do that, or we could look at it with a bit more kindness and say, hey, here's where we're at right now, and this would be the kind of holiday that would most suit us, would be the best self-care for us right now. Because it's going to be good for our souls, it's going to be good for we're going to have a great experience, and it's going to be, not stressing us out financially and making us stress the other 51 weeks of the year as well. So we picked 12 places that are kind of local, or at least, overseas, but close by and, economical places to go. And we got the kids to sit down and do some research. And so they got to learn a little bit about these 12 different places and what they might find there and what they'd like to do. And then we sat down and started going through them and picking out which one we'd like to go to, with all of those considerations in mind, including the budget, which we had a good chat with the kids about. But the point being, just the act of planning that has us all excited about it, and it has us all feeling better about the fact that we missed our holiday, and has us all feeling positive about the year ahead, that we've got this kind of fun thing to look forward to as well, right? So. I'm a big believer in creating a life that you don't have to take a holiday from, and enjoying what you do on a day-to-day basis, so you don't feel like you have to have a holiday. And I don't feel like I have to have a holiday, which is probably why this next trip we're planning is in a year's time rather than a week's time, right? But I love to have a holiday, and I'm going to love the experience of doing it with my family and seeing the world and seeing a different culture and experiencing different experiences and having quality time together and all of those sort of things. And so that planning really is an important part of that self-care, okay? And doing things that are in alignment with your purpose. I mentioned this before, but, when it comes to picking your self-care, but also when it comes to picking your day-to-day activity, I think this is a really important part of self-care. I think so many people deny themselves by not doing what they love on a day-to-day basis, by not following their passions on a day-to-day basis, by not doing things that support their passions on a day-to-day basis, right? Because it doesn't have to be that your job doesn't have to be your passion, right? But your job has to support your passion, if that makes sense. So I'm not saying everyone has to be doing what they absolutely love as their job, and sometimes people shouldn't, right? Like some people's passion is not going to pay the bills. It's not going to allow them to, live a healthy, happy life, right? And so sometimes your job is the thing you do to support you doing that passion, and that's totally okay. And in fact, sometimes when it becomes your job, it ceases to be your passion because it's your job, right? So anyway, the point being, live a life that's in alignment with your purpose. And then you're much more, I think that's a wonderful way to care for yourself on an absolute minute to minute, day to day basis. You can be caring for yourself every minute of every day when you're at work, if your work is supporting your passion, and if you're reminding yourself that your work is supporting your passion and your purpose on a regular basis, and you're constantly creating that link so that you know why you're doing what you do, then work can become a self-care activity. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I'm sure some people will disagree with that, but anyway, hopefully you get what I'm saying. All right, point 15, we're flying through these. I'm doing pretty well, keeping on track here, I reckon. Point 15 is creating a don't do list. In fact, I reckon you should create 2 don't do lists, all right? And so what I want you to do, if you wanted to sit through and do this, is you go through all of the things you do on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, on a year-to-year basis, okay? Your first don't do list is the things you just don't want to do anymore, all right? Whether that's that they just don't need to be done and life would be better if you didn't bother doing them, or whether it's things you want to delegate to someone else, whether that's your kids, whether it's a family member, whether that's an employee, whoever that may be, all right? So figure out what belongs on your just full stop don't do list. What jobs do you want to not do anymore, to pass on, to delegate, to shift, okay? Obviously, you need to have someone to do it. And so you need to be a little bit realistic in terms of this one. There are going to be some jobs that you just unfortunately just have to do. But there are going to be others that you could not do without it having any negative consequences on your life. And so I'd urge you to consider this first just full stop do not do list and see what you could add in there that would actually just be a wonderful act of self-care by not actually doing it anymore. Okay. And then your second do not do list is a do not do when you're stressed list, right? And that is like the things that when the shit starts to hit the fan and you're having a bit of a rough day and you're feeling it and you're a bit stressed out, I'm giggling to myself as I say when the shit hits the fan, because only a couple of months ago, my dad used that phrase in front of my son, who apparently had never heard the phrase before. And he just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. He was cracking up for the entire evening about the phrase, when the shit hits the fan, which caused me to, I guess, go back and really think about the phrase when the shit hits the fan and how funny it actually is. Because when you think about it, it's a pretty funny visual. And so, or maybe that's just me and my frivolity and my playfulness that likes that sort of childish stuff, and my childishness that I try and maintain in my life. But I thought it was pretty funny, and I'm giggling on the inside as I say it. So anyway, the second do not do list, getting back on topic, the second do not do list is about the things that you don't do when you're stressed, right? And so there should be an additional list of things that you can't not do all year, that you can't just leave 24/7, right? And this might be the dishes, this might be cleaning the house, this might be the washing, right? I don't know, maybe they're just 3 things I hate, and or 3 things that are just happily to not prioritize. But anyway, whatever they are for you, right? Like have a do not do when you're stress list, and when you're really feeling it, when you run down, when you it might be cooking dinner, it might be just like, well, when I'm really stressed, I just order something reasonably healthy in, and that's okay, right? So have a list of things that you're just going to not do when you're not feeling your best, and that's okay, right? And have tools to work around it as well, right? So it's like, it's not like Steffi says she did all 3 of those tonight. Yes, Steffi, I'm lucky that you do probably all 3 of those more than I do, so I do appreciate that. But yeah, I think just having a list, having an idea of what you're not going to do, but also how you're going to manage that. How are you going to catch up? How are you going to work around that? If you're not going to cook dinner, what are you going to do? What are you going to get? What are you going to order in, perhaps, that is a healthier alternative? Maybe rather than the delivery pizza, you might go on Uber Eats and find a slightly healthier version that you can order in, that's going to, still be long-term self-care as well as short-term self-care, as I keep saying. All right. Number 16 is book a holiday. I always do this. I get ahead of myself, right? So I think I've spoken about booking a holiday. I think there's a lot of benefit in booking a holiday. whether it's a afternoon, whether it's an overnight, whether it's a week, whether it's a month, right? I say month. My uncle's in Bali at the moment. He's there for a month, and he just keeps posting all these pictures. And I'm definitely having some FOMO. It looks wonderful. He's just been in Nusa Lembongan, where Steffi and I went and loved. And so I'm looking at those pictures, going, "Oh, a month in Bali. Oh, that'd be great." So I'm glad that we've planned ahead and booked our holiday. Otherwise, I probably would be getting FOMO. But yeah, book a holiday. I think there's a lot of benefit of that. Once again, as self-care. And, I reckon most of the self-care benefit you get from the holiday is from the moment you book it to the moment you start the holiday, as opposed to when you're on the holiday. So it's almost like the longer you can drag out that lead time, booking it in early, the holiday, and start to anticipate it and get excited about it and look forward to it, the more benefit you're going to get from the holiday. So that's my tip. Plan ahead. Start thinking about what you're going to do. Number 17, give yourself your love language. All right, so here's an interesting one. So many of you will have heard the book, The 5 Love Languages. Gary Chapman, I think it is. And he talks about the 5 love languages. So words of affirmation, physical touch, gifts, acts of service, and quality time. Many of you will know which of those is your love language. If you don't, I encourage you to find out what is your love language. I also encourage you to find out what is the love language of those in your life that you love, because it will help teach you how to light them up. I know Steffi and I were just talking about this just the other night, about our love languages and how they sometimes change over time, and reminding each other what our love language is and how we can make sure that we're filling our buckets up, and the importance of doing that. But I think it's a great thing that you can do for yourself as well, is that if you remember what your love language is, then you can think of a way to do that for yourself, right? So if your love language is words of affirmation, then you might write words of affirmation to yourself and stick them up on your bathroom mirror, right? If your love language is physical touch, then you might prioritize making time to go and get a massage, right? If your love language is gifts, then you might buy yourself a gift, right? And once again, if you thinking of that in the short term rather than in the long term rather than the short term, you might buy yourself a gift that's well within your budget and is going to allow you to still make more than you spend, or save some money, and not stress yourself out in the future financially by blowing your budget, right? So your gift doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be meaningful. Anyway, getting off topic. You might prioritize acts of service, right? So you might, I'm trying to think, what do you might get a cleaner to come in, or you might take your car to get cleaned, right? As an act of service, something that you don't have to do. You allow someone else to do something for you. Or you might prioritize time and just make time for yourself, to sit with yourself and to relax and to have some me time, all right? So figure out what your love language is, and give yourself your own love language. You might practice self-care by having a bit of a detox from media and social media, which is a really popular one nowadays. And I think is a great way to do it, particularly if you focus on what you swap it for. And so if you swap it for a relaxing book, a podcast, an audio book, something that really makes you feel relaxed, then I think that would be a wonderful thing to do as well. But definitely a detox from social media can be a wonderful act of self-care. And once again, I think if you've done your self-analysis, your little autopsy at the start, then you may well have recognized that as one thing that could be helpful for you. Point number 19 is outsourcing. And I think we've already spoken about that in terms of the do not do list. So I don't think I need to go too much further into that. Point 20 is talking to someone. And so, I think, this people think of talking to someone, they often think of it as being a therapist, and that may be something that you need, and that's okay. And if you do feel, well, I encourage you to do that anyway. I think that's something that's really useful. But it could also just be a family, a friend, a lover. It could be a team member from your sporting team. I think we have great chats on a Wednesday night at indoor cricket after the game, where all the boys sit around and, just chat. And most of what we talk about is just rubbish and bullshit. But every now and then, something meaningful comes up, and that's a really important time, and it's important that we have that time. And so I think talking to someone can be a really important act of self-care, and having someone to talk to can be a really important act of self-care. So try and prioritize that and try and make time for that, and create that space in your schedule, I think, is really important. Number 21 is pampering yourself. All right. And so this is, I think, what often people think of as self-care is, a massage, a pedicure, a facial, oil pulling, ice baths, right? There are lots of different ways to do it, and lots of different ways that, as I said, one person's self-care is another person's torture sometimes. I think for me, a pedicure, I couldn't think of anything worse. I'd much rather have an ice bath. And I think for most people, they'd think the exact opposite, and that's totally okay. By all means, make the time to pamper yourself or to be pampered by someone else, whether that be someone you swap with or someone you pay to do it. That's totally okay. There's benefits and drawbacks of each. I think there's definitely a time and a place for that pampering in terms of self-care. But I hope you've realized from this webinar tonight that it's one part of a much bigger picture when it comes to self-care and looking after yourself. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's just one part of a really, really big, quite exhaustive picture. All right. And then number 22 is about seeking help and professional help. All right. And so that might be, as I mentioned before, that might be a counselor. It might be a therapist of some sort. It might be a chiropractor. It might be a homeopath. It might be a naturopath. It might be a medical doctor. Whatever it is, podiatrist, whatever it is that you need, where appropriate and where needed and where you can afford it, is seeking out that expert help in order to take care of yourself. Particularly, I think, once again, thinking from a long-term perspective, particularly from a wellness and preventative basis, is looking after your health and wellness in the short term so that you can enjoy the benefits of that in the long term. And having the right professionals on hand to help with that. And, hopefully I can be one of those for you guys. And obviously you guys have the benefit of being able to access that Healthy Lifestyle Choices group. I will put the link to that in the show notes again for those of you who aren't yet in there. But you got the benefit of that Healthy Lifestyle Choices on Facebook, where you can join that for free. You can be mentored by me. You can ask whatever questions you've got. And I can help you along the way and provide you with some of that professional guidance, or point you in the right direction for where you can get it if I'm not the person to give it to you. So, seeking that professional help. And then the final one that I'm going to talk about, that I'll always talk about as a chiropractor, is looking after your posture, your spinal health, and your nervous system. All right. And so obviously, as per the last point, one of the best ways you can do that is by seeing a chiropractor and getting a regular chiropractic adjustment to make sure that your spine's functioning well and that your nervous system is free from interference. There's also other videos inside my Healthy Lifestyle Choices group about stretches and exercises you can do. The foam roller, posture pole video, all about, the number one exercise I recommend in practice is a really important one for that in terms of looking after your posture. And I'd encourage you to all do that as part of a self-care routine, because we all sit more than we should. But just, generally just stretching, maintaining your posture, perhaps doing the Straighten Up Australia exercise routine, which is available at straightenupaustralia.com.au, a routine developed by the Chiropractors Association. Is a simple 3-minute routine you can do every day to look after the health of your spine. We talk about it as like brushing your teeth, but for your spine. And so looking after the health of your spine, your nervous system, and your posture, I think, is the final one that's just really important and underrated in terms of self-care, because of the impact it has on your nervous system and because of the impact that then has on the entire rest of your health and well-being. So those are my thoughts on self-care and looking after yourself. Hopefully that was a great reminder of all of the things that you should be doing to look after yourself. Hopefully there were some really good points in there of things that you perhaps hadn't thought of before, that you may want to think about now, that might help you better care for yourself, as I said, both in the short term and in the long term, and from more of a wellness preventative basis rather than an acute crisis basis. And hopefully there's some thoughts there around expanding your definition of self-care to maybe start including a few different things that you may not have thought about previously that can be included in your self-care routine. So that's it for me tonight. I'm going to make sure that I head home and get a good night's sleep tonight and continue my self-care routine. I hope you guys are looking after yourselves. I feel like I should do like the Jerry Springer here. Until next week, take care of yourself and each other. Join up in the Healthy Lifestyle Choices group. Make sure you ask any questions you've got there. Let me help you. Let me help you look after yourself and help you with your self-care in all of those different ways. And I look forward to chatting to you there. So have a great night, guys, and I'll speak to you soon. See ya.